Afternoon and welcome to the Audit and Risk Committee for the 24th of March 2025. I'm assuming that everybody knows the script. If they want to get in touch, either raise a hand or put a P or a Q in the chat. It is lovely to have everybody here in person, so thank you for that. Given that everybody is here, we do not need to go ask the clerk for apologies. And I also need to ask if anybody has any declarations of interest with regards. No, great, thank you. We've been sent the minutes for the last meeting on the 2nd of December 2024. Are members content to agree that those minutes? Oh.
It was just to follow up on item 7 about the Tay Cities region deal. The next annual report is due to be published February, March this year, and a formal report be submitted to the appropriate committee this year. Can I ask which committee and when that's happening? Oh, sorry.
I'll get back to you on that and confirm which committee that will be going to. Thank you.
Are there any other queries? Oh, thank you for such a good question, Councillor Barrett. I'll move on to the next. Are there any questions on the outstanding business statement? Okay, can I ask if members are content that the outstanding business statement can be noted and for the completed actions to be moved from the outstanding business statement? Okay, thank you for that. We'll next move on to item 5, which is the Perth and Kinross Council Audit Plan. I'm going to ask Ms Brown and Mrs Bryan from Audit Scotland to introduce the report.
Thanks very much, Convener. This annual audit plan sets out the scope of our audit of the 24-25 financial statements and our annual audit coverage of the wider scope areas which are required by the Code of Audit Practice for the public sector audit model, which is wider than just an audit of your financial statements. I'll draw certain parts to your attention as those charged with governance. Auditing standards requires me to report certain matters to you, and that's contained within the plan. Firstly, I would note that I and my team are independent of the council, which is really key for the external audit role to be fully independent of the council, and we comply with the ethical standards that we are required to comply with. So that's stated in the introduction of your plan. The scope of the audit is set out. Paragraph 5 of the plan sets out the audit opinions and the audit reports that you'll get, including grant claim coverage that we're required to do in Scotland, which is housing benefit subsidy and non-domestic rate return. And it sets out the responsibilities respectively of myself and my team and the council. And at paragraph 9, I will ask committee members if there are any matters relating to fraud. Fraud risk assessment forms part of our planning and risk assessment processes. And if there's anything that members are aware of in relation to fraud or suspected fraud that has not already been brought to our attention, I would ask people to raise that with me when I've finished running through the plan. The next section's on the substantive audit of the annual accounts for 2024-25. We set out the materiality balances, which are the threshold that we use for judging and reporting errors to you at the conclusion of our audit, and the basis on which we would ask management to change any misstatements. So materiality overall is the level at which we would expect that to affect decision making of those using the accounts for economic decision making. Performance materiality is a trigger point for us to decide whether we need to do more work if we find a misstatement. And the reporting threshold is a kind of triviality threshold. Anything above that would be reported to yourselves at the conclusion of the audit. And the significant risks and material misstatements arising from my planning and risk assessment work are set out in Exhibit 2. They're not new to the Council. The first one is fraud caused by management override of controls, and that's presumed as a risk, a significant risk in any audit. So you'll see that in every annual audit plan, and we set out our planned audit response to that, which for this Council is quite a standard approach to covering management override of controls. The second is around the valuation of other land and buildings in your property, plant and equipment portfolio, around the subjectivity of valuations and the 5-year rolling programme, and how the Council is satisfied that it has an appropriate value for those assets in the intervening years where there's not been a revaluation of that class of asset. So again, that's quite a standard risk, and we set out the work that we'll undertake to cover that. I also point out to report to you 2 other less significant risks around estimation and value of the pension asset or pension liability. Again, that's a very technical, subjective assessment by an actuary, and small changes can make a material difference to the figures. It's quite a volatile figure in your accounts or in any public body's accounts. And the last point is specific to Perth and Ross Council, which is around the restatement of your income and expenditure disclosures, because the Council is restructured and the accounts will reflect that structure in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So the prior year comparator figures will also need to be restated to match that in this year's accounts. So we'll review the mapping process and how that data flows through. So that's extra work specific to that restructuring change. I also set out an exhibit which shows your group accounts entities and how we'll approach that group audit. I am the appointed auditor for several of your group components, so I don't foresee any difficulties with that. And I don't think there's any component that has a material impact on the group accounts, so I don't need to request or direct specific additional work in that regard to get my opinion for the group accounts. I also set out the wider scope areas of financial management, financial sustainability. So you have financial sustainability on the agenda today. We look at vision, leadership and governance, and your use of resources to improve outcomes. So those are 4 areas I will report on in the annual audit report. And we also touch on best value. And the thematic work this year is on service transformation. So there's already been some early engagement around that with the council officers, and that will drive out, we're asking each council to supply at least 2 case studies of successful transformation, so that hopefully across, well, at the conclusion of that audit work across 32 councils, we will have essentially a library of case studies that can be shared, so for wider learning. So that should have, in addition to your specific management report, which we're hoping to bring to the September committee, it will help other councils and yourself to look at what's worked elsewhere, what might work for Perth and Ross Council. And the last 2 sections are around the timetable of our reporting. We're obviously bringing the plan today. We are planning to bring the best value management report to the September committee, and we are aiming for the 1st of December audit committee for the full annual audit report. I appreciate that's not bringing it to the September deadline. We are still working, as I've said to you in the past couple of years, towards bringing in those deadlines post-COVID back to what they should be, back to the statutory deadline of the end of September. And that's set out in Exhibit 4. And just below Exhibit 4 is the proposed audit fee, which is £358,370. There's an additional fee within that beyond the baseline expected fee, which covers assessing the impact of IFRS 16, which is the new financial reporting standard on leases, the restatement of mapping for the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. And each year there's some off-ledger transactions that feed into your annual accounts that we then again map through to complete our audit evidence on that. So that's an additional 4,250 within that. And we've discussed the fee with officers. So we're bringing that to those charged with governance in the plan. And the last thing to draw to your attention is a summary of our audit quality arrangements in the other matters section, and a reference that we will not be placing formal reliance on internal audits work to reduce our testing, but we do take account of everything that internal audit reports to you to avoid any duplication and to give us assurance over our governance conclusions. So we will also say in the last paragraph, we do seek feedback from the council, from officers and from the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at the conclusion of the audit, but I'm happy to take feedback from the council at any time. So do feel free if you want to share any comments or queries with me. And I'm just going to pause there and ask, one, if there were any matters of fraud to raise, and two, if there are any questions or comments on the plan or the audit. Thanks very much.
Okay, so the first question is, do any of the members have any concerns about any fraud risks that they're aware of at this particular time? My feeling on this is that we aren't, as elected members, we aren't really close enough to the business to have a sort of sense of smell to see that sort of sense of, well, this particular person is going on very fancy holidays, and that seems to be, we just aren't close enough to the business. But what we do is rely on reports from the internal audit, who are very keen to keep us up to date with any fraud risks. And so thank you for that. The second thing is, do members have any questions for the external auditors? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. Just a couple of questions. I was looking at, it's page 15 in our papers, or page 14 and 15 sections, the audit scope and responsibilities sections 5 to 9. I just noticed that the evaluation of key controls within key financial systems doesn't seem to be specifically mentioned this year, and I just wanted to check. I assume that's assumed in concluding on PKC's arrangements in place for the wider scope areas and the general work on financial management. Is that right? Oops, sorry.
Yes, that's financial management.
The other one on Exhibit 2, Bullet 3, which is page 18 in our pack. Bullet 3, using data analytics to consider, identify and test journal entries focusing on those that are assessed as high risk, such as those affecting revenue and expenditure recognition around the year end. Again, looking at last year, it referred to income and expenditure transactions, but they don't seem to be referred to specifically this year. So does that mean you don't really think you need to do so much about that this year? Thank you.
The wording around the audit response to the management override of controls has been refined slightly based on experience and quality reviews. So income and expenditure testing will be done, but the specific risk is around manipulation at the year, or potential manipulation at the year end, and journals and areas like accruals and prepayments are the most likely areas that, should management choose to manipulate things, that's where we see the risk. So we use data analytics, and that may cover income and expenditure. And we look at cut-off testing to see for a sample of income and expenditure if it's in the correct year end, as well as the standard testing. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, convener. My questions, it's just for my own information, really, and I'm not sure whether it's for Audit Scotland's officers, but it relates to Section 9, the communication of fraud or suspected fraud. I'm just curious to know what the mechanism is should an incident of fraud be detected. How does that get referred? How's the committee informed about that? Would that come to the next Audit and Risk Committee, or would a special meeting be convened? What's the mechanism involved in informing the committee? Thank you.
Mrs. Clark, do you want to answer that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. In the event of fraud coming to my attention, whether that is through whistleblowing, through direct reporting, or through internal audit work, however that comes to light, then this committee would be informed of the outcome of that. The timing of that would depend very much on the nature of the investigations that were ongoing, but this committee will be informed at the first opportunity. Alongside that, we would, if the fraud was greater than £5,000, would be informing external audit colleagues immediately as well. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Compared to previous audit plans, are there any significant differences between this plan and, say, last year's plan?
I would say no. I do note that we increased performance materiality, which is a reflection of the quality of the financial statements last year and the level of errors that we found. So that would be lower if we found more errors, but we've reflected on our experience over the past year and increased that. But the risk committee and the statement are quite similar to last year. I'm going to say the same, apart from the restatement of comprehensive income and expenditure. But those are quite standard risks.
It would be a surprise if it was significantly different. The other question is regards to fees. The fees are going up. Can you tell me by what percentage they're going up by?
So the baseline expected fees for local government have gone up by 1.9% across the board. And then I've charged an additional specific Berthing and Ross Council specific 4,250. And I'm afraid my mental arithmetic isn't up to say what that additional percentage is, but across the board for local government, it was an increase of 1.9%.
And that's to be welcomed, as it's below, well below the current rate of inflation, about 3%. So, well done, well done. Okay, are there any other questions for the external auditors? Are there any comments? Well, my comment is that this, as always, looks like an extremely good and resilient and worthwhile audit plan. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to both of you, Mrs. Bryan and Ms. Brown, for coming down or coming to see us today. So I appreciate your presence in person. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll just move on. Oh, Councillor Harvey.
So thank you, convener. Couldn't put it better myself. I was just going to thank everybody for all their hard work. Incredibly professional and but also succinct report that's fairly easy to read and easy to understand for a non-accountant. So thanks very much for all your hard work.
If there's no more comments, then we'll move on to the next item, which is item number 6, financial sustainability. And I'll ask Mrs. Clark, to the Chief Internal Auditor, to introduce the report.
Thank you, convener. This report sets out the work of internal audit with regard to providing assurance over the key financial risks regarding financial sustainability for the council. I apologise that the report was received late last week by yourselves, but I did want the report to get to you as soon as possible. As you can see, this is quite a strong report. Despite the significant financial challenges, but the risks that we were looking around were the arrangements in place for identifying short, medium and long-term sustainability indicators, the monitoring of the financial situation, and also reviewing lessons learned from other public sector organisations. We looked at 3 specific control objectives, 2 of which have substantial assurance on their arrangements, and 1 with reasonable assurance, with 2 findings which are documented within the action plan, 1 of which has an action assigned to it. The financial challenges that are faced by Perth and Kinross Council are not unique and are faced across the public sector, and particularly around reliance on funding streams, as well as on decisions made locally. This audit is not commenting on the larger political areas, but is looking at how the strategic lead for finance and business support is managing the risks internally and also through reporting to elected members. There are areas of strength which have been highlighted within this report in sections 5.4 to 5.8, And as I said, there's an action plan at the end. I'm happy to take any questions, and there's also Scott Walker as the strategic lead is here, and also Mark Weir as well from income maximisation. Thank you.
Do members have any questions for Mrs. Clark? Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, convener. Once the two actions arising from the audit are completed, internal audit should be able to place a substantial assurance on the arrangements in place. But the first of those two actions is the strategic lead of finance and business support acknowledges this point. Is that it completed now? Is the acknowledgement the action?
Thank you for this, for that comment and question. In the normal way for internal audit reports, then that would be the case, that there would be an action arising on this one. This really reflects the amount of activity that goes on and the restrictions in what the strategic lead has in terms of his own sphere of influence. In an ideal world, then we would have an action that he would be able to take forward, but there isn't really something. But we do have to acknowledge that this remains a risk. It may well be that we can never have substantial assurance across the board in this, not for the want of officers' activity, but purely for the difficult political and financial situation. I don't know whether Mr. Walker wants to come in and add anything else to that.
Yeah, thank you. So all I would add is that we do have a suite of information that support all of our medium-term financial plan, between a 3-year detailed revenue budget, between a 6-year medium-term financial plan, a 30-year strategic investment blueprint plan, and actually up to the 2080s in terms of our capital fund monitoring. So there's a number of measures that we've got in play in terms of monitoring our financial sustainability. But I do acknowledge the risk to our financial sustainability.
Thanks. I mean, in terms of the finding about highlighting the need for a long-term funding solution, I recognise that that's a much bigger piece of work out with the control of our officers. I think, guess what I'm asking is, do we get substantial assurance when just action 2 then is completed? We don't need there's nothing further within the sphere of influence of Mr. Walker or our officers here that can be done in respect of action 1.
That's correct. There's nothing else that's been identified that could be done for that. Thank you.
Not seeing any other questions. Councillor Chan.
Thank you, convener. Obviously, we've seen an increase in council tax of 9.5%, but I was wondering if the council's actually looked into alternative revenue generation in terms of hiring out anything or doing different things differently.
Yep. So one of our financial principles is around about maximising income. So we would ask all of our strategic leads to look at anything that's coming up in terms of how we could generate income, because obviously that's going to support service delivery. And we're also got one eye to any national initiatives. So obviously there's a visitor levy that may come along in the next few years that might support council activity as well. So yeah, income maximisation, income generation is at the forefront of strategic lead thinking.
Thank you.
I've got a question. I know it's going to sound like a very basic question, but why is financial sustainability important to the council?
So for that, we need to demonstrate to you as elected members, to our citizens, that we are sustainable in terms of providing services to them. We also need to demonstrate to our suppliers, to our staff, that we are sustainable, because we don't want any concerns out there. And I'm hoping that this report, along with the work that our colleagues in external audit do, does demonstrate that sustainability. There has been commentary around about our approach to treasury management, around about our approach to about making the capital budget sustainable, etc. So I think it's important to all of our stakeholders that this report sets out how our approach to sustainability. It's not that we're getting complacent, but we have our eyes wide open as we go through the following years, the future years.
Hey, thank you. What I always say is that without financial stability that's provided by our finance team, we wouldn't be able to fill a single pothole. We wouldn't be able to have a single child going to school. Nothing is possible without financial sustainability. So thank you for your work on this. Are there any other questions? Are there any comments, members? Right, well, I would thank Mrs. Clark for this very fine report, so thank you very much. The next item is number 7, internal audit update, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Clark to introduce the report.
Thank you, convener. This report and appendix provides the current position with regard to the completion of planned internal audit work. In addition, it also highlights at section 5 a piece of work which was undertaken as a consultancy assignment. Therefore, no separate report will be provided, as had previously been agreed. And that relates to the work to support the Transformation Board to understand payments made to the third sector. Now that has been completed and is being taken forward now as part of the Strategic Commissioning and Procurement Transformation Review into its next phase. But that was a piece of advice and consultancy service that was given to the Transformation Board. I'm happy to take any comments or questions on this.
Do members have any questions? Councillor Collins-Stewart. Oh, no. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. Just looking at Appendix 1 and the status of the items and what's coming up to Audit Committee in June 2025, please could we have the papers in time, because there is obviously going to be shed loads of work for that committee, and it's not handy if you get stuff less than a business day before the meeting is due. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I'll make sure that there's plenty of time to read those reports. Thank you.
Councillor Chan.
Thank you, convener. Just probably this follow-up to Liz Barrett's question. How confident do you think we'll get these reports in the June meeting? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Vice Convener. I'm reasonably confident that that these should make it through. Obviously, there are 2 assignments which are about to commence, which may not make the June meeting, but the outcomes will be known if the report itself isn't, to me, if the report isn't actually finalised, for me to be able to arrive at my annual report. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. So audit A2302 is on Mosaic. I'm just wondering, that's come over from 23-24, but my understanding is that Mosaic's only been switched on in the last month or so. How were we? What were we auditing? What were we planning to audit 2 years ago when it's not been switched on until the tail end of 24-25?
Thank you for the question. This was identified as an area for internal audit to have an oversight of for more of a consultancy style approach as well. For during its rollout, for during the testing, looking at the user acceptance testing that was taking place prior to switch on, and obviously now that switch on has occurred, then we'll be looking back and see what the project team is doing as far as lessons learned and what have you. So it's a more of a project review rather than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Are there any comments on the report? No. Okay. Are members content to note the report? Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Next item is external quality assessment. And again, I'm going to ask Mrs. Clark, Chief Internal Auditor, to introduce the report.
Thank you, convener. This report presents the outcome from the external quality assessment of internal audit. Public sector internal auditing standards require that an EQA, an external quality assessment, is carried out every 5 years, and this report presents the outcomes for the council's second assessment, which has been delayed and had been reported to this committee previously. The delay had been reported to this committee previously. The approach adopted and approved by the predecessor to the Audit and Risk Committee was for a validated self-assessment, and this approach was endorsed by SIPFA and the Scottish Local Authority Chief Internal Auditors Group undertake a peer review of our internal quality assessments to arrive at this external quality assessment that's in front of you. I'm very grateful to Jamie Dale, who is the Chief Audit Executive of Aberdeenshire Council, who has completed this review, and this is his report, which is attached. I'd like to highlight the assessment of the Perth and Kinross Council's internal audit service is that we fully conform with public sector internal audit standards. There are 4 actions arising from this, all of which are routine and some of which are already in train, such as updating the charter, which is being undertaken as part of the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector review, which we'll come on to later in this meeting. But also in formally documenting any potential conflicts of interests and the training that is being undertaken within the team, and other actions will be taken forward over the coming months. This is in many respects very similar to the service that we provide to the council by auditing other people. This is our audit of ourselves, so I'm very pleased to say that we do fully conform, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Do members have any questions of the report? Do members have any comments on the report? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to thank Jackie Clark and her team and congratulate her on this report. With no significant areas of less than full conformance with the public sector internal audit standards, and a note that actions are underway to address the points where there was some non-conformance. I would also like to particularly endorse the comments at 2.4 on page 39 out of 204 in the pack regarding the high standards of the team. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Similar to Councillor Barrett, I'd like to thank the committee for the work, and it is interesting the findings. There are very few non-compliances, none at all, sorry, and very small amounts of that kind of work compared to when we started. That's excellent work. So thanks very much for that.
Councillor Chan.
I just also like to thank Jackie and her team for the excellent work she does, but also to Jamie Dale, who's I've obviously been speaking through email on the actual report. Thank you.
I too would like to thank Mrs. Clark and her team, and we all, over the 8 years that I've been in the council and on this committee, I formed a very strong opinion of the strength of the internal audit team. But it's given that I have, and probably most of us don't have any actual knowledge or professional knowledge of internal audit, it's extremely reassuring to get this very, very strong report from the Chief Internal Auditor of Aberdeenshire Council. So thank you very much, Mrs. Clark. Are members content to agree the report? Okay, thank you. The next item is number 9, Global Internal Audit Standards in the UK Public Sector. I'm going to ask Mrs. Clark to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Yes, an even snappier title than the Public Sector Internal Auditing Standards. We now have Global Internal Audit Standards in the UK Public Sector. This report presents 3 documents for the committee. The Global Internal Audit Standards, which are, as they say, applicable for all internal audit services across the world in all different fields. So incorporating manufacturing, public the finance sectors and what have you. The second appendix is the application note for the Global Internal Audit Standards in the UK Public Sector. And finally, the document entitled The Code of Practice for the Governance of Internal Audit in UK Local Government. These combined are the professional standards for internal auditing in local government. And I'd like the committee's formal approval that these will be the relevant standards going forward. Following this, I would propose a development session with this committee and also with and separately with strategic leadership within the council to discuss and determine how this committee particularly will take forward their responsibilities that are documented within the Code of Practice in terms of supporting the internal audit function going forward. I will also be bringing forward some key governance documents which are required in the GAIS in the UK public sector to the next meeting of this committee. By that, I'm referring to the internal audit mandate, charter, strategy and plan, which will then start the ball rolling for us to actually take these new standards forward. These standards formally come into place on the 1st of April for local authorities. So we will be working towards compliance within the first year. Our feedback from CITFA is that they're quite content with this as a process because some of these documents have only been released within the last month. So we couldn't have everything in place as at the 1st of April this year. So the first year will be a year to bring ourselves up to being conformant in these areas. But initially, I would like the approval of this committee for these documents to be the professional standards that we're working towards, and then we'll develop from there. Thank you.
Do members have any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. It's just looking at section 10 of the application note on page, I think it's 198 of the pack. Just, do we have sufficient resources to be able for the team to be able to continue to comply with these standards?
Thank you for the question. every chief audit executive would be very happy to say that, you know, more resources would be wonderful, and I'm not going to be any different from that. However, I think that we're now in a position with the posts being filled that we have, that we should be in a position to be able to do that. Thank you.
If nobody else has got questions, I've got a couple of questions. How will the adoption of these new standards affect the running of your department?
Thank you for that question. In many ways, there'll be very little difference to the day-to-day work of the internal audit function. We'll be providing the internal audit service, and that will be seamless. A lot of the areas of development are around actually evidencing what we do and how we do it. There are some core governance changes through the charter, which will come next time to the next meeting of this committee. But in terms of operations, there are some areas for us to develop as a team, and we're working through those. But it will not fundamentally change the work that we are doing, or the work that will be presented to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other question is what are the essential differences between the responsibilities for local authorities and for businesses like banks or insurance companies? What's the difference?
There are some areas within the global internal audit standards which require greater involvement of the board when it comes to the remuneration of the chief audit executive, and also the hiring and firing of the chief audit executive, which are seen to be inappropriate for a political audit committee or a non-political audit committee within local government to take forward. So that's recognised within the application note. The application note itself has come about to actually enable local authority internal audit teams to comply with the global standards. So what you see within there those are the areas that the auditing standard boards has highlighted as being areas which would be problematic, and that's the reason for that document. So basically everything that's in there, but I use that as a, you know, the remuneration, hiring and firing the chief audit executive is one which is very clearly something which is would be an operational matter for the council. Thanks.
And quite right too. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. I just wanted to thank Jackie and her team for the preparations that are being made to adopt the standards. I know it's been really frustrating having to wait so long for the code of practice and the application note, and I welcome that you shouldn't need to make huge changes to your practices and to be able to comply, and that you've got enough resources, and wish you all the best.
I know I can always rely on Councillor Barrett to steal my thunder, so thank you for those kind. Right. Are members content to approve the global internal audit standards in the UK public sector as the relevant standard for Perth and Kinross Council's internal audit service, along with the code of practice for the governance of internal audit in UK local government? glad I don't have to repeat that twice. Thank you. The last item on the agenda is item 10, is the internal audit follow-up, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Clark to introduce the report.
Thank you, convener. And again, as with the financial sustainability report, I apologise that this was late out at the end of last week. follow-up report presents the outcomes of the process whereby internal audit engages with services to ensure that agreed actions are completed and completed in full and timeously. There were 17 actions identified as due to be completed by the end of February. And of these, 14 have been verified as complete, with only 3 actions having delays in their completion dates, which are detailed within the 2 appendices. The second appendix contains actions which have previously been considered in private session. I'm happy to take any questions on these. Thank you.
Do members have any questions on this appendix 1? No. Do members have any comments at all? Now, do members have any questions or comments on the second appendix, appendix 2? Because if there aren't any comments, then there isn't much need to go into a private session. But I'm happy to go into private session if people think it's worthwhile. Okay. Well, can I thank Mrs. Clark for this extremely good report, and to ask the committee if Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 can be noted. Great, thank you very much. And that brings this committee to an end. I'd like to thank all the committee members for turning up in person. I do appreciate that. Does make a difference. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Clark and Mrs. Bryan and Ms. Brown for coming along as well, and Adam for doing all his important work. So thank you very much indeed to everybody.